I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
Very compelling kind of a figure. Odd-looking duck. There's something about his eyes. Hypnotic.
A racist, a sexist, uncivil, worse than Hitler.
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddity.
This is the main thing about my listeners. They're masochists, and they listen to my show just for the pain.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
This idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse.
Once I establish my theocracy, I will throw you in my dungeon and let you rot for it.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
Doctor, turn off my cringe inhibitors.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy then.
Oh, my shrink was right. God does hate me.
You could bring civilization to Britain, but you could never bring Britain to civilization.
You globalist cock!
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This week we are joined by Fr.James. He is the host of Barely Protestant on YouTube, and he has, I guess, a bunch of other social media channels that I can't begin to describe the full breadth of because I just looked up his title on Google and about 20 different things popped up. How's it going today?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Good to see you again. After I don't want to dox too much about you, but you officiated at my parish a month or two back. So, but it was very you did very well, and it was good to meet you in person. And everyone at the church recommended your YouTube channel. So,
well, everyone did. Ooh, that's good news.
Yeah, pretty much. So I guess what do you? I guess to get just kind of jump right into it. What do you mean when you describe yourself as barely Protestant in your title?
So yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. I grew up Baptist, and during my time in college at MTSU, actually, I became Anglican through. Well, I was first interested in Eastern Orthodoxy. That's where I discovered liturgy and the sacraments, and my nickname at that time was Barely Protestant because I would still insist on being Protestant when I was looking into Eastern Orthodoxy, coming from the Baptist world, and they would keep saying, "Oh no, but you're just barely Protestant." So I had that as my email. I thought, okay, that fits. And then I became Anglican about a year later, and so it sort of vaguely sort of fits into what I guess you could say I'm into. I'm very much a defender of classical Protestantism, but I never changed my email address, and my YouTube channel was connected to the email address. And I really didn't start doing any videos until about the very early in the pandemic. So I started doing that just for fun, and I decided to keep that name, Barely Protestant. And then it got bigger, and so here we are today. It's not me rejecting Protestantism. I see myself as a Catholic within the Anglican tradition, but I also see myself as connected to Protestantism as at least classically Protestant. So, yeah.
I obviously you wear that title with a tongue in cheek, but did that bother you back in the day when you'd go to Orthodox services and they'd say you're barely Protestant?
No, it was just fun. We would go back and forth and tease each other about those sorts of things.
Sure.
It never bothered me.
Well, that's good. I find it tends to, in my experience, it bothers me just because a little bit of this. I moved down south, and every single person I made friends with is either an orthobro or Catholic integralist, which is you move south and you think you're going to get surrounded by fundamentalists, and lo and behold, I get surrounded by the most insane religious radicals I've ever met. Wonderful people, but
another form of fundamentalism.
Well, yeah, go figure. But but when I hang out with them, I will meet them up in public, and the first thing they'll ask me is, "Have you converted yet?" Because they all partake in the cliche that Anglicanism is just a trampoline to classical, the more advanced forms
of Eastern.
Yeah, exactly. They no one believes that Anglicanism is actually a real church. I will admit at times it feels like I jumped on a lifeboat that's rapidly escaping the Titanic, but it's a very strange feeling at times, but it doesn't feel like a dead tradition. Just going to the parishes I have, they're so lively and they're full of people that really care. Most of them are over the age of 50, but no one's perfect, so Do you
yeah,
find
no, I love it. Yeah, go ahead.
do you find a lot of young people that are interested in it, or obviously you're on the younger side?
Yeah, no, actually, I've found often, especially with the more traditional Anglican parishes, they tend to be pretty young. I've seen one exception to that, which I won't name the parish, but it was a strictly 1928 parish, and it was mostly older people, but it was in an area where it was already hard to reach people, and there were other issues with it. But generally, I've always found Anglicanism to have a lot of very young people, with very few exceptions. Um, so, yeah, it's not been just something that's a dying breed that I've seen. So many people I know have come from evangelicalism to Anglicanism, or even from like Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy to Anglicanism. I know quite a few of those as well.
Really, I have not met anyone who's bounced off of Catholicism and wound up in Anglicanism. That is how did that happen?
Well, it depends on which story we're talking about.
Well, how does that generally happen? Just you don't have to name names.
Yeah. Oftentimes, so I'm thinking of one Eastern Orthodox friend of mine who became Anglican, and one Roman Catholic friend of mine who became Anglican. Both of them had already been Anglican before, and then went to Rome or went to the East, because my one true church thing, and saw that the grass was not greener, and returned. I know another one who was a priest actually, or is a priest, went to Rome and then came back and was like, no, it's no, this is not for me. And let me think. I know one friend of mine who became Anglican, who was born within the Roman tradition, and recently became Anglican about 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, it's just recognizing that the claims that Rome makes are just not true when they make their exclusive claims about the papacy or things like that. And then Eastern Orthodoxy, it could be a bevy of things. It's anti-Western, or just so muddled in their theology that they don't even know what they believe. You get I love my Ortho bros, but you get some of my Ortho bro people who are like, you just can't use logic. Logic just is not biblical, or it's not spiritual. It's not the fathers. The fathers don't like logic. It's just that sort of stuff. I'm like, oh, no, that's not true.
Oh goodness, I do find that I being part of the Anglican Church, not in any sort of official capacity at the moment, but attending one, I do find it tends to dull your sense that you are the one true church. Like I occasionally at parties I'll break out there's no salvation outside of submission to Canterbury, and every single Catholic in the room just absolutely dies, just because it's the most absurd statement in the world, and I mean it as the most absurd statement in the world, because I didn't join this church thinking I'd found the one true thing. So I guess my next question to you is, did you join Anglicanism believing it is the one true Church of God?
I joined Anglicanism believing it is part of the Church Catholic, so part of the one true church. And so there's this terminology known as the branch theory, which it could be good or bad depending on how it's being espoused. I hold to the good kind. No, but the branch theory being basically that there are different denominations, different branches that are all part of the one true church. So you can go, basically Anglicanism is part of that. When we're talking about the structural part, we could talk about how Rome has valid apostolic succession, valid sacraments. Eastern Orthodoxy has valid apostolic succession, valid sacraments. Some forms of Lutheranism have that, the Old Catholics, etc., and going on and on with them. And I would say Anglicanism is part of that as well, specifically focusing on holy orders. I can't say the same thing with, say, like a Baptist church or Presbyterian church or Methodist church, but that's, for me, that's not to say that they're not part of the church. That's to say that they are, they don't have the formal structures of the leadership within the church. It's not kicking them out of the kingdom and saying, oh, you're not going to heaven. It's saying that you don't have the proper, roof over your head as part of the church, if that makes sense.
Sure. Do you find that creates theological issues or issues in other regards outside of that? Because I obviously, if you are 100% trad Catholic, you believe that a Baptist is going to hell because they deny everything the Catholic Church believes. Like, what do you think that they're like the low church Protestant is losing by being outside of those branches?
Just not doing things properly. That's what I think that's being lost. It's just that, so there are proper and improper ways to sort of oppose things that are being done. You can protest properly, you can protest improperly. So at the Reformation, within the Anglican tradition and within much of the Lutheran tradition, holy orders were maintained, where we're saying, no, we're still keeping the same leadership and we're reforming within the church. But then a lot of the other ones said, well, we don't need apostolic succession. We don't need that lineage of bishops. We don't even accept bishops. And that would be Presbyterians and Church of Scotland, maybe not so much Calvin himself, but his those who come after him, definitely. So they just don't have the proper leadership. That's to simply just say that they're not doing things properly. And I can't go beyond that. It's not kicking them out again. It's just saying that this is not what we've received. This is not what the church has been doing for 1,500 years or 2,000 years now. So why do something different, I guess, would be the question.
I think that's the best answer. I mean, I it's something I've thought a lot about, as coming from similar background as you do, where I have a very contemporary evangelical background. And I didn't bounce off of it necessarily for theological reasons. I bounced off it mostly because I couldn't handle the rock music anymore. I just needed I needed something that was anything but that. So yeah. I kind of just stumbled my way into Anglicanism, and I haven't dedicated myself to it as the one true church, as some of my Catholic friends would suggest. But I find it's very open-minded in ways that I'm interested in engaging with, and that it's open to other people and other traditions in a way that's ecumenical but also very fair to others. Is it, from your perspective, is it difficult to be liturgical here in the South? I obviously there's something like the Flannery O'Connor stuff where you're kind of an island in yourself, surrounded by a very different spiritual tradition. Do you find that it can be hard to express your ideas to other people down here?
It can be, although I was in the San Francisco Bay Area for about 2 years, and that was different and difficult for very different reasons. Like, as an Anglican, and I've talked about this with various people, my primary mission is to reach those who don't know Jesus, who don't, as far as outreach goes, is to reach those who don't know Jesus. I'm not interested in what we call sheep stealing, which is like, oh, you're a Baptist, I want you to become Anglican. Now, I want the Baptist to become Anglican, but I'm not interested in sort of actively being like trying to snipe other churches and grab their people from them. If they are finding that they're growing closer to Christ within the Anglican tradition, God be praised and welcome. But my job is to reach out to those who are not Christian, insofar as the gospel is concerned, and so that's my focus. Yeah, does that help?
Sure. I mean, do you find the South still that kind of way?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'd forgotten the question. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, obviously the South is kind of changing. I mean, I don't think it's fair to say it's secularizing, but it feels like that there's some sort of active decay going on. That's hard to describe in terms of religion. I've heard it described as people are becoming more nationalistic, as they're becoming less tied down to any sort of traditional religion. They're becoming a little bit more fundamentalist and a little bit more rigid.
Anti-institutional.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've noticed is that those who tend to be non-denominational or anti-institutional, those sorts of things, they and this is obvious, but they kind of go either way, where when you talk to them about the importance of institutions, especially the church itself, they're going to either agree with you and eventually come around to saying, oh, we actually do need to have leadership, we do need to have institutions, or they are just going to ignore and refuse any sort of institutional leadership, at least insofar as what they think they're doing. Because I don't think you can actually ignore the institution. Like, it's going to form however, whether or not you want it to. So I've seen it kind of go 50-50, honestly. I can't develop a consensus on sort of yet on which way it goes in the east, or I'm sorry, in the south here. It just more information remains to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely coming from the north. Religion has a different feel down here. It's much stronger, but it's also kind of more brittle in very strange ways at times, and it's to the point where it's, I guess, inflexible is the best way to put it. So people get very set in their ways and very hard to convince. And of course, there's the cavalcades of refugees coming in from the other parts of the country who are eager to spread their ignorance to us. But do you find that the people that are coming in are more receptive to your ideas, or?
So a few things. First, I do want to add that I'm thinking, actually atheists have been actually relatively more open, believe it or not, in the South, primarily because they are former fundamentalists who come out of fundamentalism and think that all of religion is like this. And then I talk to them about Anglicanism, and I talk to them how, well, we don't have these weird beliefs on, well, just pick any fundamentalist belief. But we don't have any of these weird beliefs. We actually have a structure. We have organizations. We if there is abuse within the church, this is how you can report it. We're not going to be hiding it and all that sort of stuff. And they're quite open to that. Now, to the other part with others coming in who are, I've not experienced enough of that within the South yet. I've only just moved back a few months ago, and I haven't been able to do much active ministry yet. But I do know, at least in California, it's very difficult in the Bay Area. I do know that I've done some witnessing and evangelism in Pennsylvania when I was in seminary, and that was, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it's very difficult, but it's a bit more difficult. There's a lot of sort of institutionalized religion, and I generally, I mean that in a good way, but unfortunately in this sense it's in a bad way, where it's just like, well, I grew up Greek Orthodox, and I went to the to the Divine Liturgy 10 years ago, so I'm Greek Orthodox, but I haven't gone in 10 years, kind of thing, and doing whatever they want, but like, hey, I'm Greek Orthodox, or I'm Roman Catholic, and same thing, kind of thing. So it's different. It's difficult in a different way. Although there is a form of that in the South here, where it's like, well, I grew up Baptist. I remember talking to a girl. This is a few years ago now, who I was trying to invite her to our church, and I was talking about Paul, and she was talking about how she's a Christian and everything. I was talking to her about Paul, and she did not know who St. Paul was. And I was flabbergasted by that. I'm like, how do you not even know who St. Paul is?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you could have one of those, New Age Episcopalians who thinks that Paul isn't that great, but I don't know. It's really, I guess you really aren't paying attention if you're going to church every day and somehow you don't know what the epistles are. That's
well, she wasn't going every day. I was trying to get her to come back to church.
Oh, well, there you go. She's
yeah.
She didn't even bounce off it. She just stopped showing up altogether. Yeah. I would definitely agree that I found that atheists tend to bounce off fundamentalism really hard, but when they come back, they always tend to seem to go towards either Catholicism or Orthodoxy, just because they're so deeply inverse everything they understand about religion from their outset, because fundamentalism seems to set you up for a very not in all degrees, but there are certain kinds of people that they interact with fundamentalism and it stultifies them, or that makes them feel like the world, like it gives them this very flat vision of the world, so then they go out into the real world like, oh, this doesn't match the world I see at all. Then as an adult, they they go to a Catholic mass once and they suddenly realize that there's this new dimension to their religion that they just never perceived before. So they just think that there's those two options. And I at times I find the Catholics tend to like to really play up those options a little bit. It's like, oh, your choices are charismatic fundamentalist rock and roll concert or Latin mass. There's no in between at all.
Do you know Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity? Do you know that YouTube channel?
I'm familiar with the channel. I don't know the name though.
He's looking into Romanism, and he comes from a non-denominational background. And what's so interesting is that is exactly him. He more or less is like, oh, so we've got my non-denominational rock and roll concert church, or Rome, and like he doesn't really weigh any other options. Now, more recently, he's been told like, hey, you should check out Lutheranism, you should check out Anglicanism, you should check out Eastern Orthodoxy. But he's not very interested in them at all for some reason. I don't understand. But he really is just drawn to Rome. But like those are basically the two options for him. It's like either become remain evangelical or become Roman. And I'm just like, dude, if those were my two choices,
Romans are really good at persuasion. Like anytime what's the famous Chesterton quote about why he thinks Catholicism is true? And he said something to the effect of, I could give you 1,000 reasons, but they all amount to because it's true. Where they're very good at that kind of very smooth, not in a snake oil way, because I like Chesterton. Just they're very good at being persuasive. And it's because they have a lot of truth behind their claims and a lot backing them. So it helps when if you are coming at it from a fundy or an atheist background. I definitely see the appeal from that regard, where it's such an inverse.
Yeah, I was never really drawn to Rome, I have to say. When I was looking into Eastern Orthodoxy, it was because one of my best friends at the time, and he's still a good friend of mine, and I were doing what we call church clubbing, where every Sunday we would go to a different denomination and learn about the denomination. And so through that, we learned about Eastern Orthodoxy, but also we visited the Roman Church. It was Novus Ordo. We would go to the Roman college ministry stuff and everything, and we developed really strong friendships there. Even to this day, I'm friends with a lot of them. But I just never found their arguments convincing. I just like the papacy. Maybe it's just because I've loved history so much that I've studied a lot of history, and I just found the arguments that they were making like, well, it's not exactly true, and you're really overstating what's there. Claiming about the powers of the papacy and things like that, but that's just me.
Funny thing is that they make the history argument a lot, where they say like, oh, Protestantism has no historical backing to it at all. If you're going to be, Catholicism grows directly out of the Church Fathers. There's a history to it, but so does Orthodoxy. So, good luck trying to sort that out, because those guys, as much as those guys are cousins, don't put them in a room together. So I guess from your perspective, one of the things I wanted to talk about was, from your perspective as someone who's kind of between both worlds in a sense, what is it that you think that Catholicism and Protestantism should embrace from each other's traditions? Because a lot of times you meet Baptists, and the moment you hand them something Catholic, they think you're handing them something from the devil. And as well, you've seen the video now. If you hand some extreme trads a Protestant book, they will literally throw it in a furnace and say that they're doing it at the behest of the Pope. Like, what do you think that both sides miss from each other in terms of wisdom and understanding from each other?
So, just for clarification, when you say Catholic, you're talking about the Roman tradition specifically, right?
Pretty much. Like, 'cause that's the tradition I tend to engage with when I'm talking to my friends. I have Orthodox friends too, but I think that I haven't figured out how Orthodoxy fits together with everything else quite yet. So I guess for the sake of simplicity, we'll stick to the binary, because those are the two that Protestants and Catholics just really hate each other sometimes. So
I think the thing that Protestantism can learn from, if we're talking about from the Roman tradition specifically, there is an importance to structure. There is an importance to Catholicity, where we are united. And that's why, for me, I insist upon, as a Protestant, I insist upon my Catholicity. That is something that is thoroughly Protestant. All the classical reformers, John Calvin, Martin Luther, Martin Chemnitz, Cranmer, all of them, even later with John Jewell and Richard Hooker, we insisted upon our Catholicity. We still confess one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And so we need to recognize that we are part of that tradition of we are Catholic in the big C historic sense. What we can learn from the Roman tradition is that the importance of hierarchical structure, where we're just not doing our own thing and shopping around for a new bishop because we don't like the bishop that we're currently under, so we're just going to switch jurisdictions and things like that. Although that's happening in Rome too nowadays, unfortunately. They're doing the same thing with go ahead.
I was gonna say if you want to beat a Catholic in an argument, the best thing you can do is just say, okay, here's your Pope, submit to him.
Or even just to your bishop, honestly, like even the bishops. Yeah. And then the importance of unity, because I think the strongest selling point of Rome is their at least on paper unity. Now, I think it's only on paper. I don't think the unity is actually real, but they at least make an important gesture towards the centrality of unity. Now, what Rome can learn from the East, or I'm sorry, not from the East, from Protestantism, is the importance of actually having correct doctrine. Sorry, no, I mean,
let's word this more diplomatically so I don't get angry letters.
Sorry, no, I think justification by faith apart from works of the law is an important doctrine. And I know that Roman Catholics would say the same thing when it comes. They would agree that it's justification by faith apart from works of the law. They would say, well, it's works of love and all that sort of stuff. I think that while they say that, oftentimes, if you look at their understanding of mortal sin and how a single mortal sin will separate you from the love of God. So if you, let's say as a teenager, college student, you engage in a sexual sin or something like that, you're just right away cut off from the grace of God, and then you have to go to confession. And if you don't go to confession and you don't receive absolution, you are damned. And I just don't see how that fits with the entire Epistle of Romans, or just the rest of how salvation is understood, because it's no longer the analogy I give to it is this. Let's say you're married and you come home to your wife, and every day it's this same sort of system where she says, okay, she has a list, and she goes, okay, did you take out the trash? Oh, I did. Okay, did you make that phone call to the plumber that you need to? It was, oh, I forgot to do that. And then she sort of marks it off, checklist. And then at the end of that checklist, if you've not committed any of the big errors, you get her love. But if you've forgotten some of the things, or if you've not done some of the errors, or if you have made some of the errors that are on the checklist, then you don't get her love anymore. And I just don't see that as being what the love of God is. Now, that's not to say apostasy is not real. Apostasy is real, but apostasy is an active walking away from the faith, where you are totally intentionally saying, I'm no longer a Christian, I'm leaving the faith. And I don't think Rome has an allowance for this understanding where people struggle with their sin and are still in the faith, but are still struggling with even major sins. So
we'll probably need to close.
Big thing.
We'll probably need to close on this question. But how do you thread the needle for salvation and justification in terms of? Well, I guess like as a secondary corollary, how would you define works? Do you define works in the sense of adhering to the sacraments, or having some sort of fruit to your salvation? Because in some ways, when I think of my general worry with justification and salvation, I worry that the fact that that if I'm not producing goodness in others, or letting the Spirit work through me, which might be just by the evangelical working out of me, that it's a sign that it's not that you're salvation is in some way in question, that you have to kind of not necessarily publicly, work your faith, but you have to constantly be trying to work in some regard to let your faith work through you, so that it's not just not hiding your faith under a bushel, or light under a bushel, if you will. How do we thread that needle between the Calvinist, you have no say in your salvation, and the Catholic, you will go to hell if you don't make it to confession one morning before a car accident?
Yeah, so the Reformed tradition has an interesting view on justification, definitely, and it depends on which part of that Reformed tradition I can agree or disagree more or less on. Sometimes they just go the same as Rome, where basically oh, well, you did this sin, well, that just shows you're not saved. I'm like, how's that any different? How's that any different from the Roman system? I think the important thing to recognize is that we ourselves know the difference between struggling with sin and actively denying the faith and walking away from the faith, right? That guilt after sin, not just what if I get caught, but that guilt after you've committed a sin. Let's say you've yelled at someone, you've blown a head gasket, and just cussed somebody out and all that sort of stuff, and you are really truly regretting what happened there, versus someone who is just sort of going into sin so much that they are in their own minds recognizing I'm not even really a Christian. I don't have a desire to be a Christian. I have no desire to repent. I have no desire to let go of this bitterness or let go of this or that. I think that's where you can find it within yourselves. Now, we talk about the fruit. Fruit is found within the Christian, so that would also be the evidence. But that's especially more for the external evidence, looking at other people's lives, rather than just sort of it's not so much meant for an internal one of oh, am I producing enough good works that I'm definitely saved? It's more of because if you're a Christian, because if you accept the faith or not. I guess, does that make sense? Accepting the faith is the centrality, or is part of what it means when you're a Christian. If you're no longer accepting it, you're no longer a Christian.
Sure.
Even if you're sort of going through the motions, if within your own mind, I'm rejecting the faith. I actually don't really actively follow this anymore. That's when I'm like, okay, well, you're not a Christian at that point.
Sure. The only caveat that tends to throw me for a loop is the the screw tape kind of issue, where you don't realize you're doing something bad, or you don't realize you're not trying, or you're not putting, I don't want to say not putting the effort in, but you are being subconsciously drawn away. And sometimes you'll see it with Christians who really don't have any self-awareness, they're really rich or really kind of spacey, and they don't really think about themselves. They have a huge ego, things that aren't necessarily sins in of themselves, but they're signs of their fallen nature. And
yeah, no, and that's another thing. We all struggle with sin, definitely, and we have we all have blind spots. Yeah, I'm not talking about someone who's okay, well, I've been sort of rude to my friend, and it's just me just sort of not thinking, and I'm just constantly doing it, kind of thing. That's not the same as oh, I know I'm sinning and I'm still engaging in sin. It goes back to Romans 6. So Romans 6 talks about, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? His answer is no. We've been baptized in our baptism. We're united to the death of Christ. So sin has died within us and all that sort of stuff. If our question is, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? And then we respond with, yes, we're just going to keep sinning. And we're perfectly fine with sinning. That's where you have to do an introspective look within yourself and say, okay, am I actually following this faith, or am I only pretending to follow this faith?
There you go. We're almost out of time, but do you want to shout out where people can find you online, or if people want to reach out to you or anything?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm Fr.James. I have Barely Protestant. You said you looked me up on Google and you saw other channels and stuff like that?
Yeah, there's WordPress blogs and Facebook and stuff like that. So.
Oh well, yeah. There's a Facebook page that mostly just memes, and we have morning and evening prayer on there. A friend of mine does the morning and evening prayer recorded there. I've been on other channels too, so that might have been another thing. But yeah, my channel is Barely Protestant on YouTube, and it's I just do defenses of historic classical Protestantism, explanations of Anglican theology, apologetics against sort of Roman claims or Eastern Orthodox claims, or against Baptist claims, defending sacramental theology, liturgical tradition, all that sort of stuff. So if you liked what you heard here, I guess go ahead and check out the channel.
All right. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time tonight.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Have a good night. The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.